Sarah Martinez woke up to the sound of her father's heavy boots on the wooden floor. It was 5 in the morning, but she knew better than to stay in bed. Her father Miguel did not like it when she slept too long. She quickly got out of her small bed and put on her old dress. The dress had holes in it, but it was all she had. The house was old and broken down. The paint was falling off the walls, and the roof had holes that let rain come in. Sarah lived in this house in New Mexico with her father. It was 1952, and life was hard for many people. But Sarah's life was harder than most. Miguel Martinez was not always a mean man. Before Sarah was born, he had big dreams. He wanted to be a successful rancher. He wanted to have lots of cattle and make good money. But the weather had been bad for many years. There was no rain and the grass died. His cattle got sick and died too. All his dreams died with them. When Sarah's mother was still alive, Miguel tried to be a good husband and father. But after the cattle died, he started drinking alcohol. He drank every day, and when he drank, he became angry. He would shout and break things. Sarah's mother, Maria, tried to help him, but he would not listen. One day, when Sarah was 10 years old, her mother disappeared. Miguel told people that Maria had run away with another man. But Sarah knew the truth. Her father had beaten her mother so badly that Maria had to leave or die. Maria tried to take Sarah with her, but Miguel would not let her. He said Sarah belonged to him. After her mother left, Sarah's life became a living hell. Every day, Miguel would find something wrong with what she did. If she cooked his food wrong, he would hit her. If she did not clean the house well enough, he would hit her. If she made any noise, he would hit her. Sometimes he hit her even when she did nothing wrong. Sarah learned to be very quiet. She learned to move like a ghost in the house. She learned to cook, clean, and do everything perfectly. But no matter what she did, it was never good enough for her father. The neighbors knew what was happening. They could hear Miguel shouting and Sarah crying. They could see the bruises on her face and arms when she went to the store. But nobody helped her. In 1952, people believed that what happened in a man's house was his business. They thought fathers had the right to discipline their children any way they wanted. Mrs. Rodriguez lived in the house next to them. She was a kind woman who felt sorry for Sarah. Sometimes she would give Sarah extra food when Miguel was not looking. But she never called the police or tried to stop Miguel. She was afraid of him too. Sarah went to school until she was 16. The teachers saw her bruises, but they did not ask questions. They knew Miguel had a bad temper, and they did not want to make him angry. Sarah was a good student. She loved to read and learn new things. School was the only place where she felt safe. But when Sarah turned 16, Miguel made her quit school. He said she did not need to learn anymore. He said her job was to take care of the house and take care of him. Sarah begged him to let her finish school, but he hit her so hard that she could not speak for 3 days. From that day on, Sarah never left the house unless Miguel told her to. She cooked his meals, cleaned the house, and washed his clothes. She took care of the few chickens they had and tried to grow vegetables in their small garden. The garden was hard to keep alive because there was so little water. Every morning, Sarah would wake up and wonder if today would be the day her father killed her. The beatings were getting worse. Miguel's drinking was getting worse too. He lost his job at the farm because he was drunk too much. Now he stayed home all day and drank cheap wine. Sarah had nowhere to go and no money. She had no friends because her father did not let her talk to other people. She had no family except for Miguel. Her mother's family lived far away in Mexico, and she did not know how to find them. At night, Sarah would lie in her bed and dream about running away. She would imagine walking out the front door and never coming back. She would imagine living in a big city where nobody knew her father. She would imagine having a job in her own apartment. But these were just dreams. She knew she could never leave. The summer of 1952 was very hot. There was no rain for months. The few plants in Sarah's garden died. The chickens stopped laying eggs because they were too hot and hungry. Miguel became more angry than ever. He blamed Sarah for everything that went wrong. One morning in August, Sarah burned Miguel's breakfast. She was so tired and scared that she was not paying attention to the pan. The eggs turned black and smoke filled the kitchen. When Miguel saw what happened, his face turned red with anger. "You stupid girl," he shouted. "Can't you do anything right?" He grabbed Sarah by her long black hair and pulled her across the kitchen. She fell to the floor and he kicked her in the stomach. Then he picked up the hot pan and threatened to hit her with it. "Please, Papa," Sarah begged. "I'm sorry. I'll make you new eggs," but Miguel was too angry to listen. He threw the pan at the wall and grabbed a wooden stick that he kept by the door. The stick was his favorite thing to hit Sarah with. It was thick and heavy, and it always left big bruises. Miguel hit Sarah with the stick over and over. He hit her back, her legs, and her arms. Sarah curled up on the floor and tried to protect her head with her hands. She did not cry out loud because that made him more angry. She had learned to take her beatings in silence. When Miguel finally stopped hitting her, Sarah could barely move. Her whole body hurt and she could taste blood in her mouth. Miguel threw the stick on the floor next to her. "Clean up this mess," he said, "and make me new breakfast. If you burn it again, I'll beat you twice as hard." Sarah waited until Miguel left the kitchen. Then she slowly got up from the floor. Every movement hurt, but she had to clean the kitchen and cook new eggs. This was her life. This was what every day was like. As Sarah cleaned up the broken pieces of the pan, she looked out the kitchen window. She could see the desert in the distance. The desert looked hot and dangerous, but for the first time in her life, Sarah thought it might be better than staying in this house. She was 17 years old, and she had been living in fear for 7 years. She did not know how much more she could take. Something inside her was starting to change. The scared little girl was slowly becoming angry. And angry people sometimes did things that scared little girls could never do. 3 days after the kitchen beating, Sarah could still barely walk. Her back was covered in purple and black bruises. Her left arm hurt so much that she could not lift it above her head. But Miguel did not care about her pain. He still expected her to cook, clean, and take care of everything. On Tuesday morning, Miguel came home very drunk. He had been at the cantina in town since early afternoon. Sarah could smell the alcohol on him from across the room. His eyes were red and he could barely stand up straight. "Where's my dinner?" he demanded. Sarah looked at the clock on the wall. It was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She had not started cooking yet because Miguel usually ate dinner at 7. "It's still early, Papa," Sarah said quietly. "I was waiting until—" "Don't talk back to me," Miguel shouted. He grabbed an empty bottle from the table and threw it at Sarah. The bottle hit the wall next to her head and broke into pieces. Sarah jumped back, and some of the glass cut her arm. Blood started running down to her hand. She pressed her other hand against the cut to stop the bleeding. "I want food now," Miguel said. "And I want it hot." Sarah quickly went to the kitchen. She tried to cook as fast as she could, but her hurt arm made everything take longer. She made beans and tortillas, the same food they ate almost every day. They had no money for meat or vegetables. When Sarah brought the food to the table, Miguel looked at it and made an angry face. "This food is cold," he said, "and these tortillas are too thick." "I'm sorry, Papa," Sarah said. "I can heat it up for you." "You're worthless," Miguel said. "Just like your mother. She was worthless too. That's why she ran away." Sarah felt anger growing inside her chest. She had heard Miguel say bad things about her mother many times, but tonight it made her more angry than usual. "Mama didn't run away because she was worthless," Sarah said before she could stop herself. "She ran away because you hurt her." The words came out of her mouth before she could think. Sarah immediately knew she had made a terrible mistake. Miguel's face turned dark red and his hands made fists. "What did you say?" he asked in a quiet, dangerous voice. Sarah's heart started beating very fast. She wanted to take back what she said, but it was too late. "Nothing, Papa. I didn't mean—" Miguel stood up so fast that his chair fell over. He walked around the table toward Sarah. She tried to run, but he caught her by the hair. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he said. "You think you're better than me?" Miguel dragged Sarah into the kitchen by her hair. She tried to grab onto things to stop him, but he was too strong. He threw her against the wall so hard that her head hit the wood. Stars appeared in front of her eyes. "You want to know why your mother really left?" Miguel said. His voice was mean and ugly. "She left because she was tired of taking care of a stupid, ugly daughter. She told me she wished you were never born." Sarah knew this was not true. She remembered her mother's kind eyes and gentle hands. She remembered how her mother would sing to her at night and tell her stories. But hearing Miguel's cruel words still hurt her heart. Miguel picked up the wooden stick again. But this time he was more angry than Sarah had ever seen him. The stick came down on her back harder than ever before. Then he hit her legs, her arms, her shoulders. Sarah fell to the floor and tried to crawl away, but Miguel followed her. "Please stop," Sarah begged. "Please, Papa." But Miguel would not stop. He kept hitting her until the stick broke in half. Then he started kicking her with his heavy boots. Sarah felt something break inside her chest. The pain was so bad that she could not breathe. Miguel kicked her one more time in the stomach, and then everything went black. When Sarah woke up, the house was quiet. Sunlight was coming through the kitchen window. She tried to move, but the pain in her chest was terrible. When she tried to breathe deep, it felt like knives were cutting her inside. Sarah looked around and saw Miguel sleeping at the kitchen table. His head was on his arms, and he was snoring loudly. There were 3 empty bottles next to him. He had drunk himself to sleep after beating her. Sarah slowly tried to sit up. Every movement hurt, but she had to know how badly she was injured. When she looked down at herself, she was scared by what she saw. Her dress was torn and covered in blood. Her arms and legs were covered in cuts and bruises. When she touched her chest, she felt something wrong with her ribs. Sarah knew she was hurt very badly this time, maybe worse than ever before. She also knew that if she stayed in this house, Miguel would eventually kill her. Maybe not today, but soon. As Sarah lay on the kitchen floor, she made a decision that surprised her. She was not going to wait for Miguel to kill her. She was going to leave this house, even if it meant dying in the desert. Sarah had never been more than 5 miles from this house. She had no money, no food, and no place to go. She did not know anyone who would help her. But she knew she could not stay here anymore. Moving very slowly and quietly, Sarah went to her small room. She found an old bag that had belonged to her mother. Into the bag she put her other dress, a small knife from the kitchen, and a cup for water. She also took a small picture of her mother that she kept hidden under her bed. Sarah looked around the house for anything else she could use. She found 2 old tortillas and put them in the bag. In Miguel's room, she found $3 hidden in a box. She knew he would be very angry if he found out she took his money, but she needed it more than he did. Sarah wrote a short note on a piece of paper. It said, "Papa, I have gone away. Do not look for me. Sarah." She left the note on the kitchen table next to the empty bottles. The sun was starting to go down when Sarah finally left the house. Miguel was still sleeping at the table. Sarah looked at him one last time. Even though he had hurt her so much, he was still her father. Part of her felt sad to leave him, but a bigger part of her felt happy to be free. Sarah walked slowly away from the house. Every step hurt her broken ribs, but she kept walking. She did not look back. She walked toward the desert, toward the unknown. She did not know if she would live or die out there, but at least she would die free. Behind her, the old house got smaller and smaller until she could not see it anymore. For the first time in 7 years, Sarah was alone and safe. The desert night was coming, and it would be cold and dangerous. But Sarah was not afraid anymore. She had already lived through the worst things she could imagine. Now she was ready to find out what else life had waiting for her. The first night in the desert was the beginning of a new life for Sarah. She did not know it yet, but walking into that desert would save her life and change everything she thought she knew about the world. Sarah had been walking in the desert for 3 days. The first night was the hardest. She was not used to being outside alone, and every sound scared her. She heard owls calling and coyotes howling in the distance. She found a big rock to hide behind and tried to sleep, but the ground was hard and cold. On the second day, the sun became very hot. Sarah's water cup was empty and her mouth felt like sand. She had eaten the 2 tortillas on the first day, and now her stomach hurt from being empty. Her broken ribs still made it hard to breathe, and every step was painful. Sarah knew she was lost. All around her was desert, rocks, sand, and small bushes. She could not see any houses or roads. She could not see any people. She began to think that maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe she should have stayed with Miguel. At least in his house she had water and food. But then Sarah remembered how it felt to be beaten every day. She remembered the fear in her stomach every morning when she woke up. She remembered how Miguel looked at her with hate in his eyes. No, she thought. Even if I die out here, it is better than living in fear. On the 3rd day, Sarah could barely walk. She had not found any water since she left home. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her skin was burned red from the sun. Sometimes she would see water in the distance, but when she walked toward it, there was nothing there. Her mind was playing tricks on her. Sarah knew she was dying. She had heard stories about people who died in the desert. They said it was not a good way to die. But Sarah was too tired and hurt to be scared anymore. She just wanted the pain to stop. Near noon on the 3rd day, Sarah saw some green trees in the distance. She was sure this was another trick of her mind, but she walked toward them anyway. She had nothing else to do. As she got closer, Sarah could not believe what she saw. The trees were real, and under the trees she could hear the sound of water. It was a small spring hidden in the rocks. Clear, cool water was coming up from the ground and making a little pool. Sarah fell to her knees next to the water. She put her face down and drank like an animal. The water was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She drank until her stomach was full, and then she splashed water on her face and burned arms. For the first time in 3 days, Sarah felt a little hope. She had found water. Maybe she could survive after all. She filled her cup and looked around for somewhere to rest. The trees gave good shade and the ground near the water was soft. Sarah lay down under the biggest tree and closed her eyes. She was so tired that she fell asleep immediately. She slept deeper than she had slept in years. When Sarah woke up, the sun was going down. At first, she did not remember where she was. Then she heard the water and remembered everything. She sat up and drank more water. Her head felt clearer now. Sarah looked around the little oasis. She saw that someone had been here before. There were old ashes from a fire, and she found some animal bones that looked like they were from a meal. Someone knew about this place. As Sarah was looking at the bones, she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart jumped with fear. She turned around and saw a man watching her. The man was tall and had dark skin. His long black hair was tied back with a piece of leather. He wore old clothes and boots that were worn out from walking. In his hands, he carried a bow and some arrows. Sarah had never seen anyone who looked like him before. Sarah tried to stand up, but her hurt ribs made her fall back down. The man did not move toward her. He just stood there and looked at her with serious eyes. "Please don't hurt me," Sarah said in Spanish. It was the only language she knew besides a little English. The man's face changed when he heard her speak Spanish. He said something back, but not in Spanish. Sarah did not understand the words, but his voice was not mean or angry. The man looked at Sarah's torn dress, her bruises, and her burned skin. He could see that she was hurt and hungry. Slowly, he put his bow and arrows on the ground. Then he said something in English. "You are hurt," he said. His English had an accent that Sarah had never heard before. Sarah nodded. She was too tired and scared to talk. The man pointed to himself. "Thomas," he said. Then he pointed to Sarah and waited. "Sarah," she said quietly. Thomas walked slowly toward the water, making sure not to scare Sarah. He filled a leather bag with water and brought it to her. Then he went back to where he had put his bow and arrows. He picked up a small bag that Sarah had not seen before. From the bag, Thomas took out some dried meat and flat bread. He put the food on a clean rock near Sarah and then stepped back. Sarah looked at the food and then at Thomas. She did not understand why this stranger was helping her. "Eat," Thomas said in English. Sarah was so hungry that she did not think about whether the food was safe. She grabbed the meat and bread and ate quickly. It was the best food she had tasted in months. As she ate, Thomas sat down on the other side of the spring and watched her. When Sarah finished eating, she felt stronger. She looked at Thomas and tried to think of how to thank him. She did not know if he spoke Spanish, so she tried English. "Thank you," she said. Thomas nodded. He pointed to Sarah's bruises and cuts. "Who hurt you?" he asked. Sarah looked down at her hands. She did not know if she should tell this stranger about Miguel. She did not know if Thomas was a good man or a bad man, but something about his quiet voice and careful movements made her feel safe. "My father," Sarah said quietly. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where is your mother?" "Gone," Sarah said. "She left when I was little." Thomas nodded like he understood. He pointed to the desert around them. "You walked alone?" "Yes," Sarah said. Thomas looked surprised. He said something in his own language and shook his head. Then he looked at Sarah with what seemed like respect. "You are brave," he said. Sarah did not feel brave. She felt scared and lost and alone. But Thomas's words made her feel a little better. As the sun went down, Thomas made a fire. He showed Sarah how to arrange the rocks so the wind would not blow the fire out. He cooked some rabbits that he had caught, and they ate together without talking much. Sarah learned that Thomas was Apache. She had heard of Apache people, but she had never met one before. Some people in her town said Apache were dangerous, but Thomas did not seem dangerous to Sarah. He seemed sad and lonely, just like her. When it was time to sleep, Thomas gave Sarah a blanket. He slept on the other side of the fire, giving her space and privacy. For the first time since she left her father's house, Sarah felt safe enough to sleep deeply. Sarah did not know it yet, but finding Thomas at the hidden spring would change her life forever. Thomas did not know it either, but helping this hurt girl would help heal his own broken heart. Sometimes the most important meetings happen when we least expect them. Sarah woke up the next morning feeling better than she had felt in years. The sun was shining through the green trees and she could hear birds singing. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw Thomas sitting by the water and everything came back to her. Thomas was doing something with plants that he had gathered. He was crushing some leaves between two rocks and mixing them with water. When he saw that Sarah was awake, he brought the green mixture to her. "For your cuts," he said in his careful English. Sarah looked at the green liquid. She had never seen medicine like this before. In her father's house, they never had money for medicine. When Sarah got hurt, she just had to wait for her body to heal by itself. Thomas saw that she was worried. He rolled up his sleeve and showed her an old scar on his arm. Then he pointed to the plant medicine. "APACHE medicine," he said. "Very old." "Very good." Sarah decided to trust Thomas. She let him put the green medicine on her cuts and bruises. It felt cool and made the pain less. Within a few hours, Sarah could see that her cuts were looking better. Over the next few days, Thomas took care of Sarah like she was his own daughter. Every morning, he would make new plant medicine for her wounds. He taught her which plants were good for pain and which ones helped cuts heal faster. Sarah was amazed by how much Thomas knew about the desert and its plants. Thomas also made sure Sarah had good food. He was a skilled hunter who could catch rabbits and birds with his bow and arrows. He knew where to find bird eggs and which desert plants were safe to eat. Under his care, Sarah started to get stronger every day. But Thomas was not just healing Sarah's body. He was also healing her spirit. Sarah had lived in fear for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be safe. With Thomas, she could sleep without worrying about being hurt. She could eat without someone yelling at her. She could speak without being afraid of getting beaten. Thomas was a quiet man who did not talk much. But when he did talk, Sarah listened carefully. He told her about the Apache way of life. He explained how Apache people lived with the desert instead of fighting against it. He taught her that every plant, every animal, and every rock had its own spirit and purpose. Sarah learned that Thomas had once lived on an Apache reservation with his wife and 2 children. His wife's name was Elena, and she was known for making the most beautiful pottery in their community. His son Joseph was 12 years old and loved to hunt with his father. His daughter Maria was 8 years old and had a laugh that could make anyone smile. 2 years ago, a terrible sickness came to the reservation. The white doctors called it tuberculosis. Many people got sick and many died. Thomas tried everything he knew to save his family. He used all the Apache medicines his grandmother had taught him. He prayed to all the spirits his people believed in. But nothing worked. First, little Maria got sick. Then Joseph got sick. Then Elena got sick. Thomas watched them die one by one, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. After his family died, Thomas could not bear to stay on the reservation anymore. Everything there reminded him of the people he had lost. Thomas left the reservation and came to live alone in the desert. He had been living by himself for 2 years when he found Sarah at the spring. He spent his days hunting and gathering food. He spent his nights remembering his family and trying to understand why the spirits had taken them away. "I was a medicine man," Thomas told Sarah one evening as they sat by the fire. "Apache people came to me when they were sick or hurt. I helped them with plant medicine and ceremonies. But I could not help my own family." Sarah could hear the sadness in Thomas's voice. She wanted to say something to make him feel better, but she did not know what to say. Instead, she just listened. "After they died, I stopped believing in the old ways," Thomas continued. "I thought the spirits had forgotten the Apache people. I thought there was no more magic in the world." Sarah looked at Thomas across the fire. In the light of the flames, she could see the pain in his eyes, but she could also see kindness and strength. "You helped me," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe that is magic too." Thomas looked at Sarah with surprise. He had not thought about it that way before. Maybe helping Sarah was the spirit's way of bringing purpose back to his life. As the days passed, Sarah learned more about Apache culture. Thomas taught her some words in the Apache language. He showed her how to make fire without matches and how to find water in places where there seemed to be none. He taught her to read the signs that animals left behind and to understand what the wind and clouds were saying about the weather. Sarah was a good student. She was smart and curious, and she wanted to learn everything Thomas could teach her. Learning about Apache ways made her feel like she was discovering a whole new world. It was so different from the fear and anger of her father's house. Thomas was surprised by how quickly Sarah learned. Most white people, he thought, did not care about Apache knowledge. They thought their own ways were better, but Sarah listened to everything he said with respect and interest. "Your mind is like a clean bowl," Thomas told her one day. "It is ready to receive new knowledge." Sarah also began to tell Thomas about her own life. At first, it was hard for her to talk about Miguel and all the years of beatings. But Thomas was a good listener who never judged her or told her what she should have done differently. "My grandmother always said that some people carry too much anger inside them," Thomas told Sarah after she had told him about her father. "The anger becomes like a poison that hurts everyone around them. Your father has this poison, but it is not your fault." These words helped Sarah understand that Miguel's cruelty was not because of anything she had done wrong. She had always thought that if she could just be good enough, smart enough, or quiet enough, her father would stop hurting her. But Thomas helped her see that Miguel's anger came from inside him, not from anything Sarah did. As Sarah's body healed, she began to help Thomas with daily tasks. She learned to prepare the plant medicines and to cook the food he brought back from hunting. She helped him repair his shelter and organize his few belongings. Working together, Sarah and Thomas developed a routine that felt peaceful and natural. They would wake up with the sun and spend the morning gathering plants or hunting for food. In the afternoon, they would rest in the shade and Thomas would teach Sarah new things. In the evening, they would cook dinner together and talk by the fire. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. She felt useful and valued. Thomas treated her like an equal, not like a servant or a burden. He asked for her opinions and listened when she had ideas. Thomas was also changing. Taking care of Sarah reminded him of the joy he used to feel when he helped other people. Teaching her about Apache ways made him remember why those traditions were important. Slowly, his faith in the old ways began to return. One morning, Sarah woke up and realized that her ribs did not hurt anymore. Her cuts had healed and most of her bruises had faded away. She was still thin from years of not getting enough food, but she was getting stronger every day. More importantly, Sarah realized that she was not afraid anymore. She had not had a nightmare about Miguel in over a week. She could laugh without worrying about making too much noise. She could speak her thoughts without fear of being punished. As Sarah looked at Thomas preparing breakfast by the fire, she felt something new in her heart. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was love. Not the desperate, fearful love she had felt for her mother, but a quiet, steady love based on respect and trust. Sarah did not know it yet, but Thomas was feeling the same way about her. For the first time since his family died, Thomas was not alone. He had someone to care for and protect. He had found a new purpose in life. Neither Sarah nor Thomas knew what the future would bring, but they both knew that their lives had been changed forever by their meeting at the hidden spring. They had healed each other's wounds and given each other hope for tomorrow. Miguel Martinez woke up at his kitchen table with a terrible headache. Empty bottles were scattered around him and his mouth tasted like old alcohol. At first, he could not remember how he had ended up sleeping at the table. Then he saw the broken stick on the floor, and everything came back to him. Miguel looked around the house for Sarah. He expected to see her cleaning up the mess from their fight, but she was nowhere to be found. He called her name, but got no answer. He checked her small bedroom, but her bed was empty and had not been slept in. That was when Miguel found the note on the kitchen table. Sarah's handwriting was shaky, but he could read the words, "Papa, I have gone away. Do not look for me, Sarah." At first, Miguel was angry. How dare she leave without his permission? Sarah belonged to him. She was his daughter and his property. He owned her just like he owned his house and his few remaining chickens. But as the hours passed, Miguel began to worry. Not because he cared about Sarah's safety, but because he needed her. Who would cook his food and clean his house? Who would take care of the chickens and try to keep the garden alive? Miguel had never learned to do these things for himself. By the second day, Miguel was hungry and the house was getting dirty. He tried to cook eggs, but they burned. He tried to do laundry, but did not know how. He realized that Sarah had been doing much more work than he had understood. On the third day, Miguel went to town to look for Sarah. He checked the store, the church, and asked people if they had seen her. Nobody had. An old woman named Mrs. Garcia told Miguel that she thought she had seen Sarah walking toward the desert 3 days ago, but she was not sure. Miguel went to the sheriff's office to report Sarah missing. The sheriff was a fat man named Tom Bradley who did not like Mexicans very much. But Miguel knew how to talk to men like Sheriff Bradley. "Sheriff, I need your help," Miguel said in his best English. "Someone has taken my daughter." "What do you mean, taken?" Sheriff Bradley asked. "She would never leave on her own," Miguel lied. "Sarah is a good girl who always obeys her father. Someone must have kidnapped her or tricked her into leaving." Miguel showed the sheriff Sarah's note. "Look at this," he said. "The handwriting is shaky. Someone must have forced her to write it." Sheriff Bradley looked at the note. He had heard rumors about Miguel's drinking and bad temper, but he believed that fathers had the right to discipline their children. He also believed that Mexican girls were wild and needed strict control. "How old is your daughter?" the sheriff asked. 17, Miguel said. "Well, that's still a minor," Sheriff Bradley said. "If someone took her against her will, that's kidnapping. We'll help you find her." Miguel felt pleased. He had convinced the sheriff that Sarah was a victim instead of a runaway. Now he would have help bringing her back home where she belonged. Sheriff Bradley organized a search party. He asked 2 of his deputies to help, and he hired a local man named Jake Morrison who was known for his tracking skills. Jake had learned to track from Apache scouts when he was younger, and he could follow trails that other men could not see. The search party started at Miguel's house and looked for signs of which way Sarah had gone. Jake found footprints leading away from the house toward the desert. The footprints were small and light, definitely from a young woman. "She went this way," Jake told the sheriff. "Looks like she was alone and carrying something heavy. Probably a bag." The men followed Sarah's trail into the desert. Jake could see things that the others missed. A small piece of torn cloth on a thorny bush. Footprints in soft sand, places where someone had rested. After 2 days of searching, the trail led to the hidden spring where Thomas lived. Jake found more footprints around the water. Sarah's small prints and larger prints from a man wearing different boots. "Someone else is here," Jake told Sheriff Bradley. "A man, and he's been here for a while. This looks like a camp." The sheriff and his men looked around the spring area. They found the ashes from Thomas's fires, animal bones from his meals, and other signs that someone had been living there. "Whoever took your daughter brought her here," Sheriff Bradley told Miguel. "This looks like some kind of hideout." Miguel felt excited. He was sure they would find Sarah soon and bring her back home. He did not care that Sarah had left because she was afraid of him. In his mind, she was his property, and stealing someone's property was a crime. Jake continued following the tracks. The trail showed that 2 people, Sarah and the unknown man, had been living at the spring for several days. Then the tracks led away from the spring deeper into Apache territory. "They're heading toward the reservation," Jake told the others. "Whoever has your daughter might be Apache." When Sheriff Bradley heard this, his face became serious. Relations between white people and Apache people were always tense in New Mexico. Many white people were afraid of Apaches and believed they were all dangerous. If some Apache brave kidnapped a white girl, this could cause big trouble, the sheriff said. "We need to find them before this gets worse." The search party followed the trail for 2 more days. The tracks led them through rough desert country that most white men rarely visited. Miguel was getting tired and complained about the heat and the long walks, but the other men ignored him. On the 5th day of searching, Jake found a more permanent campsite. There was a small shelter made from branches and animal skins. There were tools made from stone and wood. There were many plant medicines organized in neat rows. "This is where they're staying," Jake said, "and whoever built this knows Apache ways." Sheriff Bradley looked around the camp. He saw Sarah's torn dress hanging on a tree branch. He saw 2 sets of footprints going in and out of the shelter. He saw evidence that a man and woman were living here together. "That settles it," the sheriff said. "Some Apache has kidnapped this girl and is keeping her here against her will. We need to arrest him and rescue her." Miguel nodded eagerly. He did not care what happened to the Apache man. He just wanted Sarah back so she could cook and clean for him again. The men decided to hide and wait for Sarah and Thomas to return to their camp. They found good hiding places behind rocks and bushes where they could watch the shelter without being seen. Sheriff Bradley checked his gun and told his deputies to do the same. "When they come back, we'll arrest the Apache and rescue the girl," he said. "Be ready for trouble. These people don't like to give up without a fight." The men settled down to wait. They did not know that Thomas was not a criminal who had kidnapped Sarah. They did not know that Sarah had run away from an abusive father and found safety with a kind man who had saved her life. All Sheriff Bradley knew was what Miguel had told him, that an innocent girl had been taken by a dangerous Apache. All Miguel knew was that his property had been stolen and he wanted it back. Neither the sheriff nor Miguel cared about what Sarah wanted or how she felt. In 1952, in rural New Mexico, the wishes of young women were not considered important. Fathers owned their daughters and law officers helped fathers keep their property. As the sun went down, the search party prepared for a confrontation that would change everyone's lives. They thought they were the good men who were about to rescue an innocent victim from a dangerous criminal. They had no idea that they were actually about to destroy the first happiness Sarah had ever known in her life. Sarah and Thomas were walking back to their camp after gathering wild berries and medicinal plants. Sarah was carrying a basket that Thomas had woven for her from desert grass. She was telling Thomas about a bird she had seen that morning, a bright blue bird that she did not recognize. "That was a scrub jay," Thomas said with a small smile. "My daughter Maria used to love those birds. She said they were the color of the sky." Sarah noticed that Thomas could talk about his family now without the terrible sadness that used to fill his eyes. She was glad that his heart was healing, just like her body had healed. As they approached their camp, Thomas suddenly stopped walking. He held up his hand to tell Sarah to be quiet. Something was wrong. Thomas had lived in the desert for years and he knew every sound and smell that belonged there. Now he smelled something that did not belong, the scent of white men's soap and tobacco. He also noticed that some birds that usually sang near their camp were silent. "Men are waiting for us," Thomas whispered to Sarah in Apache. She had learned enough of his language to understand simple warnings. Sarah felt her heart start beating fast. "My father?" she whispered back. Thomas nodded. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. They walked slowly toward the camp. Thomas kept his hands where anyone watching could see them. He did not reach for his bow or knife. He knew that sudden movements could make nervous men do stupid things. When they reached the clearing where their shelter stood, Sheriff Bradley and his men came out from behind the rocks where they had been hiding. All of them had their guns pointed at Thomas. "Stop right there," Sheriff Bradley shouted. "Put your hands up." Thomas slowly raised his hands above his head. Sarah stepped out from behind him, and that was when she saw Miguel standing with the other men. "Papa," Sarah said, and her voice was full of fear. Miguel looked at Sarah with angry eyes. She was wearing a clean dress that Thomas had traded for at a distant trading post. Her hair was braided in the Apache style. Her skin was brown from the sun, and she looked healthy and strong. Most importantly, she did not look afraid until she saw Miguel. "Sarah, come here right now," Miguel commanded in Spanish. Sarah did not move. She stayed next to Thomas. "I said, come here," Miguel shouted. "You belong to me, not to this savage." Sheriff Bradley kept his gun pointed at Thomas. "You're under arrest for kidnapping," he told Thomas. "The girl is a minor and you took her against her will." Thomas spoke calmly and clearly. "I did not take her anywhere. She came to me hurt and alone. I helped her heal." "That's a lie," Miguel shouted. "Sarah would never leave home on her own." "You tricked her or forced her to come with you." Sarah found her voice. "That's not true," she said loudly. "Thomas didn't kidnap me. I ran away because you were beating me every day." Miguel's face turned red. "Don't you dare tell lies about me," he said. "I am your father. I have the right to discipline you." "Discipline?" Sarah said, and her voice was getting stronger. "You call breaking my ribs discipline?" Sarah pulled up her sleeve and showed the men her arm. Even though most of her bruises had healed, some scars were still visible. "He did this to me," Sarah said, pointing at Miguel. "And this." She showed them a long scar on her other arm where Miguel had hit her with a broken bottle. Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable. He could see the scars on Sarah's arms, and they looked like they had come from serious injuries. But he still believed that fathers had the right to control their daughters. "Even if your father was strict with you, that doesn't give you the right to run away," the sheriff said. "You're still a minor, and the law says you have to obey your father." "The law says I have to let him kill me?" Sarah asked. "Don't be dramatic," Sheriff Bradley said. "Your father just wants you to come home." Thomas had been listening quietly, but now he spoke. "Look at her," he said to the sheriff. "When she talks about going home, she is afraid. When she talks about staying here, she is not afraid. Does that seem like kidnapping to you?" Jake Morrison, the tracker, had been watching Sarah carefully. He had spent time with Apache people and knew how to read faces and body language. He could see that Sarah was afraid of her father, but not afraid of Thomas. "Sheriff," Jake said quietly, Maybe we should listen to what the girl has to say. She's just been brainwashed by this Apache, Miguel said quickly. You know how these people are. They're good at tricking innocent girls. Thomas's eyes flashed with anger when Miguel called him a liar and a trickster, but he kept his voice calm. I am Thomas Yazzie, he said. I was a medicine man for my people before my family died of the white man's disease. I have never hurt a woman or child in my life. Sarah stepped forward even though the men still had their guns pointed at Thomas. Thomas saved my life, she said. When I found him, I was dying in the desert. My father had beaten me so badly that I could barely walk. Thomas gave me food and water and medicine. He taught me how to live without fear. You see, Miguel said to the sheriff. She's completely under his spell. We need to get her away from him before he damages her mind even more. Sheriff Bradley was feeling confused. He had come here expecting to find a clear case of kidnapping, an innocent white girl being held prisoner by a dangerous Apache man. But the situation was more complicated than he had expected. Sarah was obviously not being held prisoner. She was defending Thomas and seemed to care about him deeply. She also had visible scars that suggested her father had hurt her badly. But the law was clear. Children belong to their parents no matter what. Look, miss, Sheriff Bradley said to Sarah. I can see you've been through some hard times. But you're only 17 years old. The law says you have to go home with your father. I won't go, Sarah said firmly. I would rather die than go back to that house. You don't get to choose, Miguel said with a cruel smile. You belong to me until you turn 18. After that, you can go wherever you want. Thomas looked at Sarah with gentle eyes. How long until you are 18? He asked. 8 months, Sarah said quietly. Miguel laughed. 8 months is a long time. Plenty of time for me to teach you not to run away again. The threat in Miguel's words was clear. He was planning to punish Sarah severely when he got her home. Sheriff Bradley made his decision. I'm sorry, miss, but the law is the law. You have to go home with your father. Wait, Thomas said. There is another way. Everyone looked at him. In Apache tradition, when a woman is old enough to make her own choices, she can choose who she wants to live with. Sarah has shown that she can survive on her own. She has learned Apache ways. She is no longer a child. Apache tradition doesn't matter under American law, Sheriff Bradley said. But marriage does, Thomas said quietly. Sarah looked at Thomas with surprise. Miguel's face turned purple with rage. If Sarah agrees to marry me, Thomas continued, then she will no longer be under her father's control. A married woman has the right to live with her husband. She can't marry you, Miguel shouted. She's too young. 17 is old enough to marry with parental consent in New Mexico, Jake Morrison said quietly. I know because my sister got married at 17. I will never give my consent, Miguel said. You don't have to, Sheriff Bradley said slowly. He was thinking about the legal situation. If she can prove she was being abused, a judge might allow the marriage without parental consent. Sarah looked at Thomas. Marriage had not been part of their plan, but she could see that Thomas was trying to find a legal way to protect her, and she realized that she did want to stay with Thomas forever. Yes, Sarah said clearly. I want to marry Thomas. Miguel started shouting and cursing in Spanish. He called Sarah terrible names and said he would never allow it. But Sheriff Bradley held up his hand to quiet Miguel. The girl has a right to speak to a judge about this, he said. We'll take them both to town and let the court decide. Thomas slowly lowered his hands. We will come with you peacefully, he said. As they prepared to leave the camp, Sarah took Thomas's hand. She was afraid of what would happen next, but she was no longer the terrified girl who had fled into the desert. She had found her voice and her strength. The real battle was just beginning. The courthouse in the small town of Socorro was packed with people. Word had spread quickly about the unusual case. A Mexican girl who wanted to marry an Apache man to escape her father's house. Some people came because they were curious. Others came because they had strong opinions about what should happen. Judge William Hayes was a fair man who had been a judge for 20 years. He had gray hair and kind eyes behind wire glasses. He had seen many difficult cases, but this one was especially complicated because it involved questions of family rights, tribal customs, and civil law. Sarah sat in the front row next to a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who worked for the county's new social services office. Mrs. Patterson had been assigned to help Sarah understand her legal rights. Thomas sat nearby with a lawyer named David Rodriguez, who had volunteered to represent him for free. Miguel sat on the other side of the courtroom with Sheriff Bradley. Miguel had spent the morning telling everyone who would listen that his daughter had been brainwashed by a dangerous Apache criminal. Judge Hayes called the court to order and explained what they were there to decide. This court must determine whether Sarah Martinez, age 17, has legal grounds to marry Thomas Yazzie without her father's consent, he said. The first person to testify was Miguel. He stood up and spoke in his best English, trying to sound like a concerned father. "Your Honor," Miguel said, "my daughter was a good girl until this Apache took her away from home. She always obeyed me and never caused trouble. Now she wants to marry a savage who has filled her head with lies about her own family." Judge Hayes asked Miguel some questions about Sarah's life at home. "Did you ever have to discipline your daughter physically?" the judge asked. "Sometimes," Miguel admitted, "but only when she deserved it. A father has the right to correct his children." "What kind of discipline did you use?" Miguel looked uncomfortable. "Sometimes I had to use a stick to make her understand, but I never hurt her badly." Judge Hayes made notes on his papers. Then he asked Mrs. Patterson to present her report about Sarah's condition when she was first brought to town. Mrs. Patterson stood up and read from her notes. "When I examined Sarah Martinez 3 days ago, I found evidence of multiple healed injuries," she said. "She has scars on both arms that appear to be from cuts. She has marks on her back that look like they came from being beaten with a stick or whip. She also showed signs of previous broken ribs." The people in the courtroom started whispering when they heard this. Some of them looked at Miguel with shocked faces. "These injuries are consistent with severe physical abuse over a long period of time," Mrs. Patterson continued. "In my professional opinion, this girl was in real danger in her father's home." Miguel jumped up from his seat. "Those scars are from accidents," he shouted.
"She was a clumsy girl who fell down a lot."
Judge Hayes told Miguel to sit down and be quiet. Next, Thomas was asked to tell his story. He stood up slowly and spoke in his careful English. "Your Honor, I found Sarah dying in the desert," Thomas said. "She had been beaten badly and had no food or water for 3 days. I gave her medicine and helped her heal. I never forced her to stay with me. She was free to leave any time." "Why did you ask her to marry you?" Judge Hayes asked. Thomas looked at Sarah with gentle eyes. "At first I asked only to protect her from her father," he said honestly. "But now I ask because I care for her deeply. She has brought light back into my life after my family died. I promised to honor and protect her always." Then it was Sarah's turn to speak. She had been nervous all morning, but when she stood up, her voice was clear and strong. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "I ran away from my father's house because I was afraid he would kill me. Every day for 7 years, he beat me with sticks in his fists. He broke my ribs and cut me with bottles and knives. I tried to be a good daughter, but nothing I did was ever good enough." Sarah showed the judge the scars on her arms and the mark on her back where Miguel had hit her with a belt buckle. "Thomas didn't kidnap me," Sarah continued. "He saved my life. He taught me that I don't have to live in fear. He showed me what it feels like to be treated with kindness and respect. I want to marry him because I love him, not because I'm afraid of my father." Judge Hayes asked Sarah many questions about her time with Thomas. "Did Mr. Yazzie ever force you to do anything against your will?" "No, Your Honor. He always asked permission before helping me with medicine or teaching me new things." "Did you have freedom to leave if you wanted to?" "Yes, Your Honor. I could have walked away any time, but I didn't want to." "Do you understand what marriage means? The responsibilities and commitments?" "Yes, Your Honor. Thomas has shown me what a good marriage looks like by telling me about his first wife. I want to be a partner to him, not a servant." After Sarah finished speaking, several other people testified. A doctor examined Sarah and confirmed that her injuries were from abuse, not accidents. The local Apache Tribal Council sent a representative who spoke about Thomas's good character and his reputation as a healer. Even Jake Morrison, the tracker who had helped find Sarah, testified on her behalf. "Your Honor," Jake said, "I've spent time with Apache people, and I can tell the difference between a woman who's been kidnapped and one who's there by choice. This girl chose to stay with Thomas Yazzie. She wasn't being held prisoner." The most important testimony came from Father Miguel Sanchez, the Catholic priest from Sarah's old neighborhood. Father Sanchez was a brave man who cared more about truth than about keeping people happy. "Your Honor," Father Sanchez said, "I have known the Martinez family for many years. I tried several times to counsel Miguel about his treatment of his daughter. His neighbors came to me with concerns about the violence in his home. I regret that I did not do more to protect Sarah. When all the testimony was finished, Judge Hayes spent a long time thinking. The courtroom was completely quiet as everyone waited for his decision. Finally, Judge Hayes spoke. "This is one of the most difficult cases I have ever heard," he said. "I must balance a father's legal rights with a child's right to safety and protection." Judge Hayes looked directly at Miguel. "Mr. Martinez, the evidence clearly shows that you severely abused your daughter. Physical discipline is one thing, but what you did to Sarah goes far beyond reasonable punishment. You broke bones, left permanent scars, and created an atmosphere of terror in your home." Miguel started to object, but Judge Hayes held up his hand for silence. "Sarah Martinez may be only 17 years old, but she has shown remarkable courage and maturity," the judge continued. "She survived terrible abuse, found the strength to escape, and lived independently in difficult conditions. She has proven that she can make responsible decisions about her own life." Judge Hayes looked at Thomas. "Mr. Yazzie, you have shown exceptional character in caring for this young woman. The court recognizes that your actions probably saved her life." Finally, Judge Hayes announced his decision. Based on the evidence of severe abuse and Sarah's demonstrated maturity, this court grants permission for Sarah Martinez to marry Thomas Yazzie without parental consent. Furthermore, the court hereby emancipates Sarah Martinez, meaning she is legally considered an adult and is no longer under her father's authority. Sarah felt tears of joy running down her face. Thomas reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Miguel jumped up and started shouting, but Sheriff Bradley quickly escorted him out of the courtroom. 3 days later, Sarah and Thomas were married in a simple ceremony that combined Apache traditions with legal requirements. Sarah wore a white dress that the women of the local Apache community had made for her. Thomas wore his best clothes and the turquoise necklace that had belonged to his grandmother. The wedding was attended by members of the Apache Tribal Council, several townspeople who had supported Sarah's case, and Father Sanchez, who gave them his blessing. After the ceremony, Sarah and Thomas returned to their home in the desert. But now it felt different. It was no longer just a place where two wounded people had found healing. It was the beginning of a new family built on love, respect, and mutual support. Sarah had learned to read and write better during their time preparing for court. Thomas had learned more English words and had begun to trust white people's legal system. Together, they started planning a life that would honor both of their cultures. They decided to build a small trading post near the reservation where Apache people could trade with Mexican and white settlers. Sarah would help translate between languages, and Thomas would provide traditional medicines and crafts. For the first time in both of their lives, Sarah and Thomas had something they had never had before: hope for the future and someone to share it with. The scared, broken girl and the grieving, lonely man had found each other in the desert and created something beautiful together. Their love had not only healed their own wounds but had also challenged an entire community to think differently about justice, family, and what it means to truly protect someone you care about. 25 years had passed since Sarah Martinez became Sarah Yazzie. The scared 17-year-old girl who had fled into the desert was now a confident woman of 42. The grieving Apache man who had found her dying by a hidden spring was now a respected elder in his community. Their small trading post had grown into something much bigger than they had ever imagined. What started as a simple place to trade goods had become a bridge between two worlds. Apache families came to buy supplies and sell their beautiful pottery and jewelry. Mexican and white settlers came to learn about traditional medicines and buy Thomas's famous herbal remedies. But more importantly, the trading post had become a safe place for people who needed help. Word had spread throughout the territory that Sarah and Thomas Yazzie would help anyone who came to them, with nowhere else to go. Sarah stood outside their home on a warm spring morning in 1977, watching 3 children play in the yard. These were not the children she had given birth to. Sarah and Thomas had tried for many years to have their own babies, but it was not meant to be. Instead, they had created their family in a different way. The oldest child was Maria Elena, who was now 15. Maria Elena had come to them as a 5-year-old Apache girl whose parents had died in a car accident. She had Thomas's quick mind for learning and Sarah's gift for languages. Maria Elena could speak Apache, Spanish, English, and some Navajo. She was already talking about becoming a teacher, so she could help other Indian children get a good education. The middle child was Roberto, who was 12. Roberto was Mexican like Sarah, but his story was different. His father had been killed in a mining accident and his mother had died of grief shortly after. Roberto had been living on the streets of Albuquerque, stealing food to survive, when a social worker brought him to Sarah and Thomas. Roberto was good with his hands and loved to help Thomas build furniture and repair tools. The youngest was Annie, who was now 8 years old. Annie was white, but her parents had been killed by a drunk driver when she was 3. She had been passed from one foster home to another, until she ended up with Sarah and Thomas. Annie was a happy child who loved to sing and dance. She had learned Apache songs from Thomas and Mexican lullabies from Sarah. All 3 children called Sarah and Thomas Mama and Papa, and they truly were a family in every way that mattered. They had different skin colors and came from different cultures, but they were united by love and shared experiences. Sarah heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Thomas walking up from the workshop, where he had been carving a new cradle, board for a young Apache mother. "The children are happy today," Thomas said, putting his arm around Sarah's waist. "They're excited about the ceremony tomorrow," Sarah replied. Tomorrow was a special day. The Apache Tribal Council was going to honor Sarah and Thomas for their 25 years of service to the community. They would receive traditional Apache names and be formally adopted into the tribe. It was a rare honor for people who had not been born Apache. Sarah thought about all the people they had helped over the years. There was Carmen, a young Mexican woman who had fled an abusive husband and stayed with them until she could get back on her feet. There was Jim, a white war veteran who had been homeless and drinking too much until Thomas helped him find purpose again. There was Lucy, an Apache teenager who had been pregnant with no support from her family until Sarah taught her about caring for babies and helped her find confidence as a mother. Their home had always been open to people who needed safety, healing, or just someone to listen to their troubles. Sarah and Thomas never turned anyone away, no matter what their race or background. Sarah had also become known throughout New Mexico as someone who could help women escape from violent homes. She worked quietly with social workers, police officers, and church leaders to create a network of safe houses and support for abused women. Many women who had given up hope found new life through Sarah's help. Thomas had become famous for his traditional healing knowledge. Doctors from the university in Albuquerque came to learn from him about plant medicines. He had trained several young Apache men and women to carry on the old healing traditions that were in danger of being forgotten. Together, Sarah and Thomas had written a book about desert plants and their medicinal uses. The book was used by medical schools and had been translated into several languages. All the money from the book went to help support their work with homeless and abused children. But their most important achievement was not what they had built or written. It was the example they had set for others. Their marriage had shown people that love could cross racial lines and that families could be created through choice as well as birth. Sarah's story had become quietly legendary among women throughout the Southwest. Mothers would tell their daughters about the girl who had been brave enough to walk into the desert to escape abuse. They would say, "If Sarah Martinez could survive what she went through, you can survive anything." Thomas's story inspired other Apache men who had lost family members to tragedy. He showed them that it was possible to rebuild a life after terrible loss, and that helping others could heal your own pain. That evening, as the family sat around their dinner table, Sarah looked at each face illuminated by the warm lamplight. Maria Elena was telling them about a book she was reading for school. Roberto was explaining a new carving technique he wanted to learn. Annie was giggling about something funny her friend had said. Sarah remembered the dinner table at her father's house, where she had eaten in fear and silence. She remembered Miguel's angry face and the sound of his fist hitting the table when he was displeased. Now her dinner table was filled with laughter, interesting conversations, and the comfortable warmth of people who loved each other. This was what a real family was supposed to feel like. After dinner, Sarah and Thomas walked outside to watch the sunset. They did this almost every evening, taking time to appreciate the beauty of their desert home and to talk about their day. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had never run away that night?" Thomas asked. Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes," she said. "But I don't think I would have survived much longer in that house. Miguel's drinking was getting worse and his beatings were getting more violent. I think he would have killed me eventually, and then I would never have met you." Thomas said quietly. And you would still be living alone, talking only to the spirits of your first family, Sarah replied. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors as the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. We saved each other, Sarah said finally. Yes, Thomas agreed. But we also saved Maria Elena, Roberto and Annie, and Carmen and Jim and Lucy and all the others. Sarah nodded. Healing spreads like ripples in water. When one person finds safety and love, they can help others find it too. As the stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, Sarah thought about the scared 17-year-old girl who had walked into this same desert 25 years ago. That girl could never have imagined the life she had built with Thomas. Sarah had not only survived her abuse, she had transformed her pain into purpose. She had used her own experience to help countless other people escape from violence and find healing. Thomas had not only recovered from his grief, he had found a way to honor his first family's memory by creating a new family and by using his healing gifts to help others. Their love story was not just about two people finding each other. It was about how love could grow and multiply and change the world around it. It was about how the most unlikely meetings could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. As Sarah and Thomas walked back toward their house, they could hear their children's voices inside, getting ready for bed. Maria Elena was reading a story to Annie while Roberto finished his homework. Tomorrow would bring the tribal ceremony and the honor of receiving Apache names. Next week would bring new challenges and new people who needed their help. The years ahead would probably bring both joy and sorrow, as all lives do. But tonight, Sarah and Thomas were exactly where they belonged. In a home filled with love, surrounded by family. In the desert that had brought them together and taught them both how to live without fear. Sarah's journey from victim to survivor to healer was complete. But her legacy would continue through the lives she had touched and the love she had shared. The scared girl who had walked into the desert to save her own life had ended up saving many others as well. And in a small house in the New Mexico desert, 3 children from different backgrounds were growing up believing that families are created by love, that differences make people stronger, and that there is always hope for a better tomorrow. Sarah Martinez had run away from death and found life. Thomas Yazzie had lost everything and gained everything. Together, they had proven that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose for yourself.